You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A Radiant Creator isn't making a living, they are living.
Welcome to Radiant Creators, Jake. We're talking to Jake Richards, who recently wrote a book, Backwoods Witchcraft. We read it, and it's an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of data about really Appalachian folklore, and also that folklore actually in practice. Jake, Dr. Henney, follows a family practice as a Yarb doctor, a conjure man in the Appalachian folk magic tradition. So that's kind of an introduction into who you are and what you do, but it's a bit ethereal, and it's rooted in tradition. I don't know how to really introduce you, so I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've always lived in East Tennessee, and I don't know that, these practices have always been in my family. Starting, as far as we know, about 5 or 6 generations back, on both sides of my family. As you said, my mother's the 7th daughter, so she was always she was born with the healing touch, so she could always cure different maladies or anything like that simply by touching or rubbing the wound or afflicted area a certain way. And then her father, my papa, was a Baptist preacher, a free will Baptist preacher, and he was able to talk out fire, buy off warts, or sometimes even wash off warts with a dish rag. He could take fever out with an egg, stop the flow of blood, among a multitude of other things, simply because he was what they called a child who had never laid eyes on his father, because his father had passed away soon after he was born, so he never actually got to meet his father. And then his wife, my grandmother, she has the sight. Her mother before her, my Mama Siegel, she did this work and always had oil lamps burning and strange things burning on the old wood stove that she had in her house, and then her father also, we believe, did the work because we recently found a photo of him holding a doll, which is kind of odd, but where Nana has Alzheimer's now, we can't really get any information out of her now about her father. But yeah, it just goes down the family line or whatever. So that's why I decided to take this practice up and, bring out the practice as it is authentically, without any, modern add-ons or anything like that steer away from the tradition, because the tradition is dying out with, the elders are passing on, times are changing, and things like that.
Yeah, I really like when we find things of value that are passing on. And it's always a very sad situation, because there's many, many beautiful things in the world that are important, that have deep roots, that are wonderful. You could say one is amateur radio. Sounds odd, but it really brought forth a lot of interest in electronics and global communication. But it's an art that's kind of going away. I even think about things like the Elks Club here in America, and the VFW and such like that.
Yeah.
Really, there just aren't many old people left to do it, and young people are not really entering that. There's not such an interest in the VFW as there used to be at the Elks Club. And so, you go in there and everybody's on oxygen tanks. There's a couple old people, and there's maybe a few young ones, but definitely it's changing. It's passing on. And so, but we never really know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And so it's so great to keep these traditions alive and to keep things alive. Because I think about amateur radio, of all things. It seemed like it's been a dying art. It's been a dying hobby. dying knowledge for, gosh, quite a while. But recently it's getting a resurgence because of preppers. It wasn't even 5 years ago you wouldn't have seen all the prepper books in just Safeway. Prepper magazines like Recoil Magazine and Off the Grid and things like that. Well, that's actually creating a resurgence in amateur radio. And so maybe it's not dead. Maybe it's going to pick up again. So I love that you're doing this work and that you took the time to study this and that you're keeping it alive and you're documenting it, because it appears that it's fading away, but we don't really know. And you'll have created a foundation of work that the future can look at to continue this. And so that's really important. How has life been since you got the book out? It's fairly new, I believe, as far as its release. And what kind of feedback have you gotten so far?
I've gotten a lot of good feedback, and life's just been, pretty much the same, aside from the hectic scheduling of interviews.
Yeah,
like trying to get them all scheduled and not try to, overlap them or anything like that.
Oh, I get it. Well, we're definitely thankful to be able to harass you for a little bit, and it's because you're working full time and you're also doing your folk magic work, basically. So, are you still? How's the balance going?
Between work and my business?
Yeah, work in your business.
Pretty good. Having a day job doesn't really affect the work that I do for clients too much. Because the majority of my work I do in the evenings.
That makes sense. Well, I'm looking at your. There was a review of your book over at pathos.com. Mm-hmm. And I like something that the person said. He said, the folklore and superstitions of Irish and Scottish immigrants and Native American spirits are introduced in stories and folktales told by the people that live here. The mountains are home to several spirits that Richards describes in detail, from haints, ghosts or demons, to animal spirits, to the little people of the indigenous tribes. And since I have some Appalachians in my family, when they heard haint, they kind of came to life. and they went, I haven't heard that for a long time since they, moved from that area. So can you describe a haint and what life is like with haints and how the Appalachian people, what is their relationships to haint in daily life?
Mm-hmm. Well, haints are essentially just double the people in your life, basically. There are some good ones, and then there's some that, you just can't stand. Haints can, obviously, as you said, include, what the religious here would deem as demons, but it can also include, lost souls that don't know they're dead, souls that don't know they're causing problems. And then you have, the spirits that do know that they're causing problems, the spirits that do essentially seek out attention. And those are usually the spirits of people who either, died alone a long time ago or whatever like that. So, their graves haven't been tended to. They haven't really got much of attention. So essentially bothering us is entertainment for them. I recently, just this past weekend, I went up into Lee County, Virginia to help this old woman with a haunting. Her grandkids lived with her, and there was some kind of spirit, haint, boo hag. We're not exactly sure what it was, essentially, because the activity of it was all over the place. But a large sinkhole had appeared on the property I'd say it was about 10 feet in diameter and maybe 20 feet deep. But the spirit, or according to the little kids, the spirit would come and either pinch their toes until they bled, or one of the kids would sleepwalk and almost, basically be led to the sinkhole. So yeah, the relationship between Appalachian Americans and the spirits that reside around us depend essentially on the basis of the relationship, how it's formed, where that spirit comes from, what its intentions are, and things of that nature.
And then you mentioned little people, and I think most people they're going to understand animal spirits, the notion of that. But by little people, so what are little people?
Well, the little people here are, essentially the same as they are all across the globe. It is a belief that in a race of small humanoid spiritual beings that reside in the trees or the hills or the rocks or even under the creeks. For the Cherokee, it was I believe the pronunciation is Yonwi Junsti or Junsti. Which essentially means little people. But they also had another distinct race of spirit people called the Nunehi, which essentially means they live everywhere or they live forever. Those were like spiritual warriors, and they would come during times of trial. There are also stories where the Nunehi appeared to the Cherokee before the Indian Removal Act was enacted, telling them, come with us and you can live in our realm forever. Some of them went, but some of them decided to stay and, fight for their homeland. But the actual little people were described as being about 2 feet tall with long black hair and olive skin like the Cherokee and looked just like the Cherokee in dress and everything, except for their music and the way they spoke. They seem to have had their own certain Indian language. And the Cherokee distinguished them into 3 clans, which was the Laurel clan, the Rock clan, and what was the third one? It was the Rock clan, Dogwood clan. That's the third one. And they were essentially distinguished based upon their temperaments toward people. Some of them were, just mean and straight out nasty, while some were just playful, and then others just didn't really mind, people, or they would, help like people who got lost in the woods, or people who, needed help, needed healing, or anything like that.
I get it. That folklore, that history, that's pretty remarkable. And then how long would that have been around? So that comes from, I think you mentioned which tribe was that they?
The Cherokee.
The Cherokee. And so that would go back to at least in the history that we're thinking of, like the 1750s or easily that.
Yeah, I believe the first stories started being recorded in, about the 1750s, 1780s.
That would make sense, because that was about the time that we were interacting, the earliest time. Yeah. Well, in your book, there's something that really struck me. It's page 42, and you just called it Honest Work, and it leads into a couple things I wanted to just touch on. And this section goes, I think it's one of the best parts of the book. And you said, so be honest in this work with yourself and the spirits. Go to the fields and forests. Go treasure hunting. Go put your feet in the water and listen to the wind chimes as the minnows nibble at your toes. Till the soil, align the rows, sift the stones from the dirt, and plant the seeds. Over time you will know the land, and it will know you. It may take a while, but I can say for sure, as I've been stomping through creeks and woods my whole life, your bones will root themselves in the soil eventually. Just be honest and curious about it all. The best things are found through curiosity. Coincidentally, these are the same things that are cherished for a lifetime. And wow, where did that come from? That is quite, for anybody who likes, let's say, Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. I mean, that kind of sums that the book that he wrote up. I mean, like, how long did it take to create that? Where were you at when you made that amazing paragraph?
Well, I've always had that, feeling in regard for life. And I have my elders to thank for that, because growing up, especially whenever I would spend some time in the summer over on in the mountains of North Carolina at my mama Hobson's house, I would continuously be, hiking up the mountains or playing in the creek or whatever like that. And I would be continuously be bringing in like bugs and rocks and sticks and all kinds of things like that. And, Mama and her daughter, my Nana, they would just call them treasures. So that was kind of like the mindset that I was taught, and I still do that to this day.
Oh, and you called them
It's hard
treasures. I love that. You call them treasures, and that's really important. You went and found treasures. And, when you sit in nature, when you're in nature and you watch a bird find a cool stick that it's going to use for its nest, you can go, oh, look, it's got a treasure. And to that bird, it really is. And, I love it. It's just a knowledge, a respect for, and an appreciation and a witnessing of life. Like, recently I saw... I love antelopes. I just do. Don't know what it is about them. I love the speed goats. They're just the most majestic, beautiful things. And I'd never seen a baby one. And there was one that couldn't have been a week old. And it was standing next to his mother. And it just looked like a little, doll, like a little mini antelope. And I just thought, wow, there's a treasure. And the fact that I got to see it was a blessing. And you start to feel blessed by what you see. Like it really is a gift to you, like it is a treasure. Well, you said over time you will know the land and it will know you. And you mentioned that your bones will root themselves in the soil eventually. And that makes me think of something I want to ask is a sense of place. Is that essential? Like, you've lived where you live for a while, like your whole life, but many people have moved around a lot. Maybe they're not really living anywhere close to home. Maybe they wouldn't even know where home would be. I mean, how essential is that place? Like, we seem to need a home, a place. Like, you're living where you've lived. You have a sense of place, and you've had time to get to know it. You know the nature there, etc. I mean, how important do you think place is for an individual's, health, body, mind, and spiritually?
Well, it takes on kind of a different context, especially in Appalachia, because a lot of the majority of the people here, they've been in these mountains for, hundreds of years. And oftentimes it's, involuntary. Because a lot of people want to leave, and no matter how much they want to leave, they either just can't, or they, always end up coming back home. It's just like these mountains give you like a sense of security. Like the first time I ever went out west anywhere was simply to Nashville, Tennessee. And I swear all of that flat land scared me to death. I didn't see a mountain. I didn't see a hill. I was like, I don't feel safe here, which is not only, the mountains protect us from bad weather and tornadoes and all of that stuff, but I think there's a deeper spiritual sense of the land itself that grows over time in the community. Because in Appalachia was, abandoned for, the majority of America's history, and is only recently being, recognized as a region of its own, as a culture of its own, to the point to where, the Appalachians tried capitalizing on that. So, and still to this day, tourism is our the biggest market in our economy. Like, you can just take one good look at Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and that'll tell you all you need. But, being in isolation all that long, and in these small knit communities, and whether it was in the valley or between the mountains or whatever like that, really all you had was, your neighbors, your family, and God, and, the land that you tilled. It's hard to put into words.
I get what you're saying, though. It does seem like a sense of place, of home is essential. We have a connection to a land if we have spent time there. I've oftentimes thought about accents. What creates an accent? And I've often thought that like the land does, a place sort of influences and creates the accent. It's almost like those mountains created that accent. Because somehow the land and the people, they're not separate, and so they affect each other.
Exactly. I also often think about how the mountain and the mountaineer aren't really dominant or subdued by the other. The mountain couldn't really, tame us or conquer us, but we also could not really tame the mountain or conquer the mountain. So it's more like we live in a mutual respect with the region and the environment. To the point to where if there's, a bear running around in the city, everybody will, take notice and try not to hurt it and try and do their best to get it back home, up in the mountains. I don't know. I think especially with Christianity being in Appalachia being a different flavor than the rest of the world, I think there is a little bit of animistic quality to it, to being connected with the land itself, as well as in connecting with God, which can be seen in many of the hymns that originated out of Appalachia, whether it's talking about climbing a mountain or going through a valley, going down to the water to pray. The land has affected us in a lot of different ways that can't really be described in words per se as to how exactly important it is, especially when the land has been shaping and sculpting a people for hundreds of years, and even the people before us, the Cherokee and the Indians before them, for thousands of years, literally.
And it's really a gift to be aware of one's environment. I mean, people are living existences where they eat food that is bad for their body. They're not really in touch with their body, and therefore they're not really in touch with the land either. They don't experience it.
Exactly.
And that's why I often think about when people litter in nature, they throw their garbage off the side of the road. I think to myself, well, I resent it, but I also realize that person sees their own body as a garbage dump. There's just, if nature is not sacred, then the body is not sacred. So to grow up in a place like that maybe just by being there, you feel sacred, just because the place has a lot of energy. Well, when I think about place, I mean, I grew up in the East Coast, and that was in Delaware, and it's right there on the Delaware PA border. So I was used to like woods and old growth forests, and it was really something. I loved it. And I lived in the Seattle area in Washington for a good number of years, and some other places. But now I'm living in the Arizona desert, and it's tough because you go, man, this does not feel like where my bone marrow belongs.
Oh, yes. I've been to Arizona. I hated every minute of it.
Yeah.
Last time I went through Phoenix, Arizona, I think it was 120 degrees, and I could not for the life of me figure out who decided to camp out there and then just turn it into a city.
Oh, it always gets me because, Arizona's been here for a while, and there's wagon trains that go across it, etc., and you can go out to really old stagecoach stops and things like that, and it's got a lot of nothing in it. Which is actually something. I mean, those spots in the map where there is nothing, those are not undeveloped. Those are sacred. Those are important. And then you go. Nevada's got a lot of it too. I mean, you can get out in the desert to where you can look in every direction. There's nothing but desert, and that's a beautiful thing, and it's important. But it's also kind of terrifying to me because it's like you're talking about you didn't like it where it was flat. I'm used to there being forests and trees, and you walk 10 yards into the forest, you don't even know which way you came from. You're lost. Hope you got a compass.
Yeah.
And here you have desert, and it's really it's unique. You're like, it's so hot, and I can't imagine. See, now we have a car, and you've got air conditioning in the car and such. I think to myself, people were tougher back in the day. You mean you rode a horse across this?
Right.
Everything wants to stab you. It's hot. It's really hot. There's no water.
Yeah, there's not even humidity.
It's crazy, but I also love it. It's weird because that's the thing. Then you'd have to then coming here. I think about creating a relationship to the land. That relationship you get with your environment, with the land, and I don't want to be adversarial to it. It's very truthful. It's very powerful. It strips away all things that are not essential. This is really an incredible place to live. I don't think we'll live here forever, but for the moment we do, and it's almost like as you get older and wiser, and you think about relationships. You realize, wow, the older and wiser you get, the more there is to you. When you enter a new relationship, you think, wow, there's a lot to do to actually establish entwinement with somebody. It's easy when you're young. The older you get, it just gets more complex. There's more to it, Yeah. And I come to this new land, and I go, oh my gosh, So me and Arizona, we're starting to get a good relationship. We're starting to entwine. We're starting to really have a mutual interest in one another. But it's very shocking when, I think I'm more of an Ice Age hunter than a desert dweller. But it's important to cultivate that. Well, what do you think about people going on pilgrimages to where they're from? Like, I know that there's 23andMe and other services, and they look at your DNA and they kind of tell you that you're from everywhere. And I'm not necessarily sure I truly believe that. I think there might be an agenda behind that. I think you, at least in recent generations, are probably from somewhere. And
yeah,
I just, like, for me, I know that I'm pretty much Scandinavian. Not completely, but mostly. So if it's 50 degrees, drizzly, no sun, kind of windy, I'm almost in short sleeves and I'm loving it. I'm like, yes, this is wonderful. Then you put me in Arizona and I'm like, what is this? Did someone open the gates of hell?
Yeah.
It's insane. Humans can't live here. But what do you think of a person, let's say they're from Ireland, or they are from Scandinavia or Germany, or they're from Australia? Like, they know there are some roots. They know there is a place their family came from. What do you think of pilgrimages back to those places to see where your bone marrow came from?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I I think that is really important, because it's a totally different thing to try and relate to your ancestors and passed on elders simply through stories. It's a total another thing to actually be on the grounds that they walked on, or be in the environment that they lived in, or anything like that. It kind of brings a sense of reality to every other layer that you know about them.
Yeah, there's something to actually going back to where they walked around, where they were, that gets you in touch with something in yourself. Yeah, because they're a part of you. So I love the idea of pilgrimages going back to where you're from, or at least where you were from recently, as far as you can tell. It's interesting. And here's one I didn't have notes to ask about it, but since we were asking about haints and little people, and I say this actually very seriously. I'm not like asking a weird question, but Bigfoot, because I've had encounters with Bigfoot, up close, personal. I've seen it. We've looked at each other, and so from the folklore perspective, from the work that you're doing, your study, who is it? What is it?
That I haven't really put much thought into.
And that's fine too, yeah.
I mean, I believe Bigfoot exists because, I mean, it is a high possibility because, I mean, we discover new species every single day. And I kind of think like the reason why no bodies of them have been found is, I think, because if they're smart enough to stay away from us, they could have also either learned from us or done something similar to us, like maybe they bury their dead. If that does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. It's like we all find ungulate skeletons, as they say, but we don't tend to find predator skeletons, and it's mainly because predators go off into the woods. They sort of kind of go off into the depths of nature to die. So it just tends to be a habit that they have. And so, like, most people have never seen a mountain lion skeleton or a bear skeleton. It is a pretty rare thing. And so, not finding the remains would not surprise me, especially if they were a community of intelligent, beings. Then maybe they would just say, well, let's not leave, skeletons laying around or candy bar wrappers. We don't want people to get the lowdown on where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned God, one thing I really liked in your book is all the biblical verses, and you mentioned there's like a certain version of Christianity there, and I like it. And something that really struck me in the book was the beginning of the book. Well, actually, a lot of parts, but I want to read this one little thing here, where I found this on Amazon or about your book. The Bible is more than a book. The Bible is much more than a book in Appalachia. It is heritage and an extension of the family. Oftentimes, family Bibles held the only records for births, marriages, and deaths, among other important life events. It also served as a charm protecting against haints and nightmares if placed under the mattress. So I'm definitely going to put a Bible under the mattress. It's a good idea. So can you explain that? What is this beautiful relationship to the Bible and this unique version of Christianity that you have there? Because it's different.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the early settlers, they obviously came over with their religious beliefs. But then over time, a spirit of a spirit of independence grew in the southern Appalachian region, and this independence applies to just about every aspect of our culture, especially in our religion. Because back in the day, people had to do without a preacher or anything like that, so there was never like a level or hierarchy built that you had to, like, stepping stones in order to talk to God. Growing up, I was always taught that, a person could get saved just as good as if they were sitting in a pew simply by, sitting on the toilet talking to God. So there was in Appalachia, there's no barrier, essentially, between you or the Creator. Just like my great... Oh shit, how many greats? I think 3 or 4 times great-grandfather. His name was Sidney, and he was a circuit rider. A circuit rider was essentially a preacher who would travel around a certain area, usually ranging at about, usually about 100-mile radius, take a, few-day travel. And he would stop in each community and stay there for a couple of weeks and preach the gospel to them, do baptisms, marriages, whatever. But then after the preacher leaves, that doesn't mean that, the conversations with God stop.
It makes sense. I like that there's no, barrier between you and God. And I think it kind of feels like there's no barrier between you and nature, you and your family. It just seems like a very organic and sacred life where you're kind of like, it's almost like you're driving down the road through the woods and every telephone pole is like an altar. I mean, that's really how it feels, from your writing. And I think that I just call it sacredness, that aliveness to our environment and our place in it is something that's really lacking in our world today. And I think one of the important things about your book, Backwoods Witchcraft, is that even if a person maybe they don't have interest in folk magic of Appalachia, maybe that's not really an interest to them, I would say a life the way that that it is lived there seems like it would be an interest to many people who just want to feel more alive and not disconnected from themselves and their environment.
Yeah.
And your Nana, who you talk about some in the book, and I really like it. As we get into, talk about like Christianity and the Bible there and the way it's unique, I like how in one section called Barefoot Wandering, I think it's page 40, you mention that before making any kind of remedy, Nana always made sure the Lord was involved through reciting either of these two psalms. Do you remember what those are?
I don't remember the exact verses, but it's the... Yeah, I was never good with verses.
That's fine.
I'm good with the actual words, but I can't tell you what, book or chapter or whatever.
Gotcha. Words are good enough.
The Lord heard me cry unto him. I might be getting them mixed up.
It's fine.
He answered unto me.
Yeah.
Or I cried unto the Lord, and he has healed me.
Yeah. So, it was, O Lord, my God, I cried unto thee, and thou hast healed me. Psalm 32. Mm-hmm. And then, or 30-2. And then the other one was, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he included unto me and heard me cry. No, I'm sorry. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. Psalm 40-1. So and then also Nana comes up again. And you said she often, and this was, I forget which page, but you mentioned that Nana often recited John 6-50 when breaking bread. Mm-hmm. This is the bread that comes down from heaven so that one may eat of it and not die. And so, you grew up in a world full of people who were they were living this sacred experience. How did that affect you as a child being around that?
Well, before I started delving into it, I didn't really, think anything of it. Because, growing up, I was always hearing, Bible verses being recited or anything like that. So it didn't really, stick out like a sore thumb to me until I was about 10 or 11 years old. Once, I started making the connections or whatever. But yeah, with those two first verses, we don't always really say them like cut and dry. Sometimes they are melded together or whatever. So that's why I've never really, put much emphasis on remembering them exactly. And that's done with a lot of Bible verses, especially with the folk aspects of Christianity. There's a lot of things that a lot of people believe, like still to this day believe wholeheartedly is in the Bible, but it's actually not. Like my Nana Trivet, she still believes that. What was it? That in the end times a griffin will fly in the sky. But I've read Revelations multiple times, and I have never found anything about a griffin. So again, that could be just like a corruption of what is it? It's like the angels that sit around the throne of God with the heads of beasts or eagles or something like that. Because, back in the day, a lot of people were illiterate. So, things that were in the Bible would get spread around and twisted, kind of like a game of gossip, if that makes any sense.
It makes sense.
Yeah, so it seems to be, I don't know, it's like an Appalachian tradition of corrupting things. Whether it's words or doctrines or whatever it is.
I like it. Well, that's the thing. It's really the intent. It's what's meant that's important. And sometimes, a little slang or rewriting it gets across the meaning better
Exactly. God knows what you mean.
Yeah, God knows what you mean. Yeah.
God talks just like you.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's true. And I love that ideal of, you can, uh, you have that one-to-one relationship. And that's the thing. I dig that. It's so you really seem to have grown up living like in a sacred place, living like a sacred life with, nanas that were doing biblical quotes while they're making bread. And that leads me to stump water. Since I have some real Appalachians in the family, they were just amazed by stump water. So, could you tell us a little bit about stump water? Because at least for the Appalachian people that I know, which is just two that are from there directly, it's an important thing. It's a big deal.
Yeah. It as far as I can tell, it originally derives from the Cherokee people and their form of medicine. They regarded stump water with such, sacredness because it was water that had fallen from heaven but had not yet touched the soil. So it was believed to still contain, essentially the spirits of heaven, or the energies of the heavens. So it was used for multiple purposes, whether it was washing off freckles, washing the hair, washing off warts, all sorts of different things for, health and beauty and things of that nature.
Yeah, and I mean, who doesn't? It's funny if you've been out in the forest and you come across a stump. It's a magical thing. Then also, I mean, if it's got stump water in it, well, now to gather a little bit of that. But even the gathering of that would be a process. You wouldn't just go and stick a cup in it, right?
Oh no, there's, as far as I can tell, from folkloric writings and from what I've heard, it's never supposed to be bottled. But you're supposed to go about it certain ways. There's different variations based on, where you're from, whether it's Kentucky, East Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. But many of them talk about, you have to use it on a full moon, or you have to use it as the full moon is rising and the sun is setting. You have to walk to it backwards without speaking to anyone from the time you leave your house until you come back home. So there's a lot of different variations that grew up around that particular curio or remedy.
Gotcha. So, like, what are some of the things that you've done with stump water? Have you done any remedies recently that where that was a part of it?
I haven't personally. I have, found it in, nature and stuff, but never at, the right time to wash a wart off or anything like that. I just always seem to run across it at the wrong damn time. I think I've only found, I'd say, about 2 or 3 stumps that are, just perfect enough to actually catch the water and contain it after a rainstorm. Sometimes stumps will fill up with the water during the rain, but then after the rain, the water just kind of seeps through, into the wood. So it's I don't know, it just has to be conditioned just right to, hold and contain the water in, a puddle big enough to, even wash your hands or, wash a bit of your hair with it.
I like it. You have a chapter in the book. It's chapter 3, I believe, and it's called Barefoot Wandering, Connecting with the Land. And even though you have a chapter in the book about it, which does describe it, I'd like to ask just how would you define barefoot wandering, connecting with the land? How does a person do that? Of course, they're going to get your book, everybody. Buy Jake's book, but while you're waiting for it to get there, and you can read chapter 3, for yourself, could you explain chapter 3 to us a little bit?
Chapter 3 essentially,
Barefoot wandering.
Yeah, because as far as I've known and experienced in doing this work, the land does play a large factor in the work, whether it's simply knowing the items and herbs and animals that live on the land with you, or if it's, simply the spirits of the land that reside there. Um, Building and creating those relationships can, in the long run, um, be very beneficial. Um, Now, actual, land spirits, or Jenny Loki, as they're called in the, modern occult world. Um, and Appalachia, those can be anything. It's, the spirit of an animal or somebody's ghost, or it could simply be the, how would you term it? The residual energies of a place. Just like if I mentioned in the book about, a bridge that's known for suicides, it itself would have a particular feel or spirit about it. Um,
That
Especially
makes
with,
sense.
living on a piece of land that has, been there for, you know, generations, many lives and deaths have taken place on that land. Um, Creating that mutual respect in that relationship can benefit you in certain ways. Just like one of my friends, they live up in Boone's Creek. She lives in a house that was built, I believe her neighbor said, in 1903. It was in the very early 1900s. But the man who built it, for some reason, he only lived there for 3 days before he decapitated himself in the attic. And the bottle of liquor that he was drinking is still up there. Um, and even before that, that piece of land was a part of the Civil War. And just across the street, there's 13 graves for of old Civil War soldiers. And then there was after that, most recently, I think she said in the 1980s, there was a couple that had moved into the house. This is what her neighbor had told me, because her neighbor's been living there for decades now, right next door to that house. Said that a young couple had moved into the house, and it was a woman and her husband was in the army, and they had about, I think she said, 20 dogs and some cats and some goats and pigs or whatnot. And they kept all the dogs out in a big pen next to the house. Well, while the husband was away, off at war or whatnot, well, he came home and found his wife cheating on him, so he left her. Well, she apparently got real depressed and bitter and mean, and she just, started neglecting all the dogs, and she'd only toss out a loaf of bread every week for him. And that the neighbor, my friend Pam, said that she would go over and try and, feed them, pieces of hamburger meat or whatever, anything of actual sustenance besides, just bread. Well, one day the dogs apparently got so hungry that they not only started eating eating each other, but two of the dogs, I think she said they were Great Danes or some kind of other big dog, somehow broke out of the pen and got into the barn and ate the goats and chickens alive. And my friend Jen, the one who lives in that same house now, said that Pam originally told her that story when she was in the barn one day, and she heard a huge growl behind her, but there was nothing else in the barn. So now, whether or not the spirits of those dogs still reside on the land, we don't think that they do. We think it's more of like an echo through time, if that makes sense. Due to
It makes sense. Yeah.
whether traumatic or just very violent act that occurred on the land, it's like a memory burp from the land itself.
No, it makes sense. It certainly does.
So, understanding what, history has gone on in the land, I think is a good place to start in, understanding what occurred on the dirt that you're standing on. and it will also give you an idea of the kind of spirits that could possibly reside there, and lead you further into building those relationships with them.
I like it. It reminds me of, as odd as it sounds, metal detecting. Metal detecting is a very fun hobby, and people go to areas that are old, that have been there for a while, and they start, using their little metal detectors, and they find the land, like they find the history, so there's a certain fun in searching for that history. And like I think about here in Arizona, if you go to any landmarks, any, some relics of any kind out in the desert, you just get this feeling of sparseness, of, it's usually really hot, but you get this feeling of aloneness. It's like you're in the middle of an ocean, but it's not kind like an ocean is. It's just you're in the middle. You look at this feeling. So I know what you mean. I felt it in the Pacific Northwest where I lived. You feel, power, and you feel the history, and you can be driven to sort of study that history and find out what happened there. But even if you're walking old logging roads that are growing over in the Pacific Northwest, you feel the history of the logging. You feel it. So yeah, I think it's important that people do that. I haven't gotten as much as I'd like to check out many of the relics that are in the desert here of Arizona, but there are many. And when you do see them, I always am just amazed that, people lived here. People lived here, and they made this structure, they lifted rocks, and they and they put this here. There's some very well preserved. They've been excavated Indian ruins, of earlier cultures, and you just think there's all the rooms are square. Then this one room in the middle that faces the east is round, and everybody has many there's a lot of conjecture as to, well, why was this one round, the rest were not? What did it mean? And I think to myself, at least what I did is, well, why don't you sit in it? Why don't you spend some time in there, and it'll tell you what it was done for. And I sat in there and just faced east where the door is open. You're allowed to crawl in there if you want. And I don't know what happened there. I don't know what it was for. But I guess I would say it told me. I need to spend more time to really know for sure. But somehow I could feel what it was for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a section in your book called Stolen Flowers, Tools and Supplies. And I like this. It starts out with, I'll just read it. It says, the one thing I remember about because this is very charming, and this is really powerful, and I like how, a life surrounded by this deep lore, this deep knowledge, to grow up in this, and also to continue cultivating it through one's life is amazing. I love stuff like this, and I find it to be true, even if I don't understand it. I just get it. You mentioned the one thing I remember about my Nana Trivett's kitchen is the flowers she kept. They were never given to her or bought. They were stolen. She'd pick a rose from a neighbor's bush down the road and bring it home to root, or pluck a stem from a plant at a garden center. She always said stolen flowers grow best, although she loved flowers of any kind. But she will never thank you for them, or they'll die. Stolen flowers bring love and luck to the household, symbolizing the simple beliefs that keep the family going. And that's amazing. So your Nana Trivett appreciated flowers, but if you gave her flowers, she wouldn't thank you because they would die?
Yeah, she would always just either say, oh Lord, what would she say? She'd always say either, I'll take good care of it, or she said something else. What was it? Either that or she just changed the subject. Or she just mentioned what she's going to do with it. Like, I'll just put them in this vase here, or, something like that. And I swear, every plant that I've ever bought from a garden center and I've accidentally said thank you, it dies.
Well, I like this. Now we know. when you're, when you're
especially when you're buying it from a place, I got to get all awkward and be like, "Thank you for your customer service." That way, it's specified, and then they just look at me weird. I'm like, "Don't look at me like that. I want to keep this plant alive."
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can. I agree. You got to figure some way to avoid. You got to be like, don't say thank you. Don't thank him for it. Don't thank him for it. And if it comes up, I'll just say it's a beautiful plant going to a good home or something. I can't thank him. I like that. It's strangely powerful, but it reminds me that this whole section, stolen flowers, tools and supplies, and the way you start like that, it reminds me of a Russian saying. And the person who was telling me the saying, they said it doesn't exactly translate into English in any perfect way because it's just Russian's a different language. They said, but the closest way to translate this saying would be, it grows better if you steal a little. And so I guess in Russia where they were from, they're all ruthless, like they all. They all steal from each other as far as plants because you would never buy it. It won't grow well if you buy it. You got to steal it from a neighbor. So it's this kind of game they play. Like, so if you see like your neighbor in your backyard, like, grabbing something, it's just, you kind of got to let them do it because you got to steal it. It's the only way it's going to grow well.
I never heard of that before.
Oh, it's true. And then you think like, where does that come from? It's like, I think we just have to, it's strange because I think you can feel it. Like, where does it come from? I don't know why that room is round, but I can sit in it and I know, but I can't describe it. Why should I not thank anybody for a plant? I can't exactly describe it. I don't know where that comes from, but I know I shouldn't. And it's like, oh, these things, but it makes life fun, and also a way of living that I see comes across in your book. It's you call this section like honest work, and that's one. I think you're talking about doing the work that you mentioned in the book of folklore, and I think of barefoot wandering, like the type of life you're describing. Yeah, I think you were really referencing, you're saying honest work. You were saying like live honestly on very many levels. And I'll just read it real quick, this little section. You said, honest work. You will never be able to build relationships through books or other people alone. Your connection to the land under your feet resides in your blood. The blood that runs through my veins is raced through those of my ancestors as they tilled the soil and pushed the plow. The power of relationships in Appalachia is built through honest work and good food. It's built with family and love, and it's an integral part of our culture. And I thought that was just a great section. It's a section in Barefoot Wandering, actually. And you called it honest work. So it just seems like really honest life. It seems like living in a way that, brings life, that promotes harmony with nature and family and such. I know that like modern society seems a bit off track and not doing that. Would you say that's true, that in general we're not doing that?
Oh, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I included that portion in the book. Because it's so easy to get swept up in today's world and essentially forget where you come from. You forget your roots, or as the locals would say, you get too big for your britches. I don't know, you have to remember where you come from because it's a part of your story. And with the people of Appalachia, it's a part of our communal and historical story. Because we were left on our own. So, and that is what birthed that same spirit of independence is, we had to rely on ourselves and our communities. And the real meaning behind honest work is, don't screw me over, I won't screw you over, or, leave me be, I'll leave you be. But that also applies, internally, be honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself. And it's a sad reality in Appalachia that, folks don't really have a lot of high expectations out of life, especially growing up. For a lot of communities, what has been done is, what will always have to be done. No matter how, how much aid people try to bring us or anything like that. Because for hundreds of years, we've just all been poor. So, we had to make do. So that also had a large impact on, our independence, our culture, our religion, and even with, the folk magic and folk medical practices.
Yeah, and it just seems like it's a good, that little section there is a great, just kind of blueprint to how to live a powerful life. And so I think you really wrote something very powerful in the book there, and that section definitely spoke to me. And it's important, a person should read that and ponder. Well, along with that, how about, let's talk briefly about the home and making that sacred. Because I think a good place for people to start, after they go to Amazon or your website and they order the book, Backwoods Witchcraft, while they're listening, order the book. It's important, It seems like a great place to start is the home and making that sacred. And I think a great way to bring some sacredness, let's say some honest life. I like that, to live honestly. A way to start bringing sacredness into life is to bring it into the home, and altars seem very important. I mean, around our house, altars spring up all the dang time for almost anything.
Yeah.
Like, you really can't have enough altars. So, can I ask, what is the importance of altars in the home? Do you have a bunch of altars in your home? I mean, they're these sacred places that you walk by and you go, oh, sacred.
Well, not as I've ever experienced them, and not in the particular sense of, modern altars. Physically, certain altars were made for the ancestors, whether it was, deceased relatives, deceased friends, and whether that was placed on the entertainment center or on a bookshelf or on a table somewhere. It was simply a place of remembrance. But the biggest altar in, Appalachian homes is essentially the living room, because that also has always been a part of our culture, is, communing with the family, because especially, way back in the day, there was, essentially nothing else to do after, the day's work was done. And you had to figure out how to get along with all these other people, because, you're stuck here. You ain't got no choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, there isn't really altars, in the modern sense, as I explained in the book. But, people who, did this work, or, they were a folk healer, or, they were a conjure person, they would have their own little, working space, whether that was simply a few mason jars filled with herbs and different things, or a couple of dolls here and there. There wasn't a lot of, shrines, essentially, like in a Catholic household or anything like that. Especially because Catholicism has always been looked upon suspiciously in Appalachia, as, I always grew up, being taught that Catholics were idolaters and all sorts of things. But at the same time, a lot of people here, still honor the Blessed Mother, in the form of Our Lady of Guadalupe or St. Jude. And to this day, those are the only candles, like, the what are they called? Glass vigil candles, I think they're called.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Those are the only ones that you'll essentially find here, like in a Walmart or a Dollar General. And those are usually the first type of candles to, be sold out. Even though the Catholic population is very low, both of those saints are patrons of the poor. And, the organic, animistic nature of Appalachian Christianity, as I explained many times in the book, gives some leeway into that factor. So it's essentially, because Mama always explained it to me, because Mama always had an affinity for Our Lady of Guadalupe, even though we were all, born and raised Free Will Baptist. She'd always say the one person that Jesus ever listened to was his mama. So if you want something to get done, you talk to his mama.
I like it.
I lost my train of thought.
Oh, altars and how the...
Oh, altars. Yeah. So yeah, there wasn't, anything big or elaborate, like you see in Appalachian folk magic's cousin tradition of, deep Southern hoodoo, or even the, altars and shrines of the Mexican curanderos. Because the only way that I can describe it is the land itself kind of becomes an altar, because not only is it your home and it gives you your livelihood in the form of food or rest or sustenance, but it is also the place that you sleep and pray, if that makes any lick of sense.
Oh, it completely does, because, really, it's just expanding the altar. Like, we tend to have an altar... Well, I guess altars right now can be very contrived. Especially since nothing's wrong with being New Agey at all, but you look at it, and many people have they have an altar, and they have a big crystal and like a picture of a geometric deer behind it, and whatever, and and they like to sit next to it.
I don't really think that altars really made much of an impact or development in Appalachian folk magic. Again, simply because of, our spirituality and our culture. Because there wasn't really a reason to set up a shrine or anything like that. Even, ancestral shrines. They usually just consisted of a candle, a Bible, and some pictures of your ancestors, with the occasional, glass of water, especially on, dates like anniversaries, birthdays, or, the Memorial Day or Decoration Day in May. But all full on altars, with tons of candles and tons of images and things like that to use as a focal point, I don't think really had anywhere to, take root in Appalachia, because it was already filled with the independent spiritual belief that, God goes with you wherever you go. There's no point in, setting up a table for a spirit when, the spirit goes wherever you go or wherever you call it to. I've worked on tree stumps, bales of hay when I needed to, other people's kitchen counters, wherever it may be. Because the spirit follows you, and it, essentially knows what you need. And, so there wasn't really a need for a stationary focal point to make or establish or work that connection.
No, I get it. I get what you're saying. And it reminds me of the one section you had just called honest work. And if you're living that honest work, that honest life, then there's an old European saying called the hand is with them. Just meaning that, that person who has that inspiration is living that honest life, the hand is with them. It just kind of helps them, and so I guess if you live in the honest life, the hand's with you anyway. So everywhere is the altar. And I like how you mentioned the living room was an altar. That's actually something that is great to ponder because it's true. I mean, I like how the altar just becomes less centralized and more expansive. Yeah, why wouldn't the living room be an altar? I think that's great. I mean, where is your altar? Oh, it's the living room. That's remarkable. And it reminds me of a book. Some of the things that we've been talking about remind me of a book. Maybe may have come across it or heard of it. I have to admit, I never read the whole thing. I got about a quarter of the way through and I haven't finished it. But it's called Hillbilly Elegy. Hillbilly Elegy. It's called. It's weird. It's Hillbilly then Elegy. It's a weird spelling. Mm-hmm. And it's called a memoir of a family and culture in crisis. And it's by a guy, Jack J.D. Vance, and he grew up in the Rust Belt city of Middleton, Ohio, in the Appalachian town of. He grew up in the Rust Belt city of Middleton, Ohio, and the Appalachian town of Jackson, Kentucky, and really. He talks a lot about how just like the low expectations of the people, how they feel stuck there, and you've mentioned that a time or two, and I just wonder, where do you think that comes from?
Well, I've heard of his book, but I unfortunately haven't read it yet.
Me either. I'm still working on it. Just a few pages. But that feeling of stuckness, where does that come from?
That I'm not exactly sure. A lot of people, they hate the way things are here, the way the economy is, and all sorts of things like that. But at the same time, it's like your heart and soul itself is rooted in the land, because everything you've ever known is here. All of your family's here. The bones of your ancestors are here. So it becomes like this sense of like the only way of life, and you just have to make do with what you're given. So a lot of people simply grow content with that. Just like, because I used to do travel for work. I would travel and set up retail stores. I would go in and set up like the aisles and the shelves and things like that. And the few times that I went to California, it was such a strange place. And of course, everywhere I went, I was always asked, "You got an accent?" And I'm like, "No, you did. You're the one that's talking weird." And to me, it just didn't. I don't know. All of everywhere else that I've been, aside from home, or the local areas like Virginia, North Carolina, or Kentucky. Everywhere else out west just has this weird, strange feeling that for me, as growing up in the mountains and stuff, just I don't know how to explain it. It feels nice. Like I loved California. I loved it, but I didn't like the people. I didn't like the culture. I didn't like the traffic. It just wasn't for me, and it was just so strange and foreign. That the entire time that I was gone, I was continuously reminded of why I loved my home. But then every time I would come back, I would be reminded of why I hated my home. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, basically, if you're, able to get out of these hills, but then you find yourself back.
I get it, because a place can be beautiful and powerful, but it's not
also, trapping, and
like
I say in the book, it'll sometimes lead you to madness.
And that's the thing. Everything is a double-edged sword along those lines, because, like, here where I'm at in Scottsdale, Arizona, it wasn't that many years ago before. I should say, it wasn't that many years ago when the place was a road and lots of saguaro cactuses, and that was about it, Yeah. And there's still towns like that in Arizona. You can go up north a little ways or down south. You can go And, if you were a person, let's say that you like really love desert and you don't like people, well, there's places you can live in Arizona where you'll get a shit ton of all that.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get all the desert you want and as few people as you can imagine. I lost my train of thought there. I guess we're both doing it. It's Mercury retrograde,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And so
This is just a daily thing for me.
oh gosh. I'm usually not this bad, so I'm a little bit exaggerated. But wherever I was going with all that, regular listeners will laugh. But yeah, a place. So place where, well, anyway, I'll probably have to edit that out. I really screwed that one up. I'm glad it's not live. I'll be the one thing I kind of remove. We were talking about place, yes, and
the double-edged sword.
the double-edged sword. Okay, that's it. Yeah, perfectly. So maybe I'll just leave that in there. It's kind of fun. Well, so the thing is, out here in Arizona, you got many of these little mountain towns. I shouldn't say mountain towns, but I guess you do up north. But in the desert, you've got towns, you've got little dwellings, you have different sized communities. And really, if a person wanted just desert, or as you go north, it gets a little bit, cooler. If you wanted a small town with a little road through it, you can get it. It's here. And many people, I imagine, especially when they were young, they would lose their minds. They'd be like, "Oh my God, I hate it! I want a Trader Joe's or something. I want, I would like some, to be able to kind of live in the world, but I live here and I'm stuck here. There's just a road. That's my, community. There's a road that goes through it. That's it, and the speed limit is 35 miles an hour, and I can see that frustration, but also there's a beauty of that silence, of that place. You can spend time there. You can get to know that environment. You can get to know that nature there. Because I look at, like, say, where I live now in Scottsdale, it used to just be a road through a little town. And now it's exploded and it's grown. And it's funny, but I kind of, even though I haven't lived that long, I mourn the loss. You know what I mean? It's like it's great that it's grown, but at the same time, something has died. It's a shame. So I get what you're saying. It's quite that double-edged sword, because you're there and you're bored. Nothing is there. You feel trapped, but you leave. And then you realize, wow, I kind of lived in paradise, just that paradise is boring.
Yeah.
But if paradise becomes exciting, well, then it dies. It's not, you know what I mean? It's funny. I see it a lot. Everybody investing in real estate might really like it because the town is being built up and they're going to make money. But at the same time, the soul of the area, the land dies.
Yeah. And not only that, but, other things are lost, whether it's, a particular tree or, even people being displaced.
People being displaced.
Yeah, like through gentrification.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, that's happening just about everywhere here. A bunch of, like tourists who just come here and they just want to stay. But then they make so much money, and then then the city starts bringing in more expensive housing, and then either they want to live in the city or they also want to live in the country. And then us poor people are kind of like pushed in the middle. So like not many places here anymore to, live in the country. It's usually big mini mansions, basically. But then if you want to live in town, the rent is expensive, going on $800, $900 a month. Like right now I'm literally living in the cheapest place that can still be found in all of East Tennessee, basically.
That's something. Yeah, it's a tough one, I do. I see many, things that have value that I kind of, mourn their loss. Like you're speaking of where you're living, and it to me, there's always this aspect of disharmony with people. it would be nice if people came and they said, oh, it's nice, and they liked it, but somehow they connected to the land and they found it sacred, and they went, well, I'll build a house here. Oh, but no, I got to carve up the side of a mountain and put this big thing on it. And you start thinking, why'd you have to tear up so much land, so much environment? Because the deer and the antelope and, well, not antelope on hills, but the deer and the elk and such, the animals needed that, and you just totally disturb the environment, so, I guess I know I can't control the world, but I guess I am quite the environmentalist on some aspects. I really think we need vast expanses that don't even have ATV roads through them. If you can't walk through it, you can't go, because that's how the land.
It ain't for you.
It's not for you. It's like
if your feet ain't made for it, you ain't supposed to walk there.
They're exactly like you have to earn it. Nature, it's like, sure, you can drive in a little ways, but then you got to park, and there are the trails the animals make, and you can follow those, follow the game trails. You can, we do have public land in this country, thankfully, and we have a lot of it in Arizona here and Nevada. There's a lot in the Pacific Northwest and such. Well, in some parts of the Pacific Northwest. And New Mexico's got it. But even then, a lot of times you're leasing a permit from a forestry company, or you're on somebody's ranch. But at least there's some nature that is left that's undisturbed. So I feel that's one of the important things about. Here's a wild one that I'd run by you. When I look around, I see a lot of people are unhealthy. It's very easy to see. You look around, there's a lot of ill health out there.
Yeah. And
I've often wondered if an aspect of that, and this is out there, but I'm out there, so, don't be alarmed. It's that, could it be that our connection to the land just isn't good? Because, we pave a lot of it. We got roads. Rather than just have a beautiful, mountain there, you got to have a little road up it and mansions carved into it. It seems like if we disturb our land, if our land is not alive, if there's not enough vast expanses that are undisturbed, that can only just be disturbed by boots or preferably moccasins or something like that, does that make the people sick? You know what I mean? Like if the land is not alive, if a certain percent of the land is not truly alive, do the people start to lose energy, start to become ill?
Exactly.
I think they do. It's my belief, And so a lot of Americans don't look so good because the land is getting too paved, too developed. So it's funny, like where you're at is boring, but at the same time, it's also essential to like, the very vitality of the humans that live on this continent,
Yeah.
And
especially in like cities, as you said, where they're just paved over from top to bottom. People who, live in the city and never leave, like in New York City, they're essentially just constantly floating above the earth. They're not touching the actual soil. They're always, a foot or two above it, with the only thing between them being like a huge slab of concrete.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many people who...
they're, spiritually and quite literally disconnected from the earth.
The concept of earthing comes to mind, because if you've heard of that, I mean, it's very simple. I think the fact that we have a word for it shows that things are jacked up and not right. We should not.
Exactly.
There should not be an earthing movement. Damn it.
Right.
So no kidding, really. So, but earthing is this new trend where people are finding health and meditative bliss by walking barefoot on the planet. It's this new thing that we just realized that might have health benefits, and there's documentaries about it. So anyway, but
I've read those where there's like antidepressant microbes in the soil or something like that.
Yeah, there's so much to it,
among a bunch of other things.
Yeah, I think there's a new documentary out. It's just called Earthing, and I gotta admit I haven't watched it because I keep shaking my head. I'm like, do I need to watch this? This is crazy. but I want to, and like on the cover, there's like a barefoot on grass, like a human barefoot on grass. And It's just like, really? It's just, to me, the fact that we need to actually have that documentary, that this is a trend, that, wow, touching earth, touching nature will make you healthy. We just figured this out.
How long have we been disconnected?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but I thought taking a vitamin every day would fix everything.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's just like foreshadowing of within the next 30 years, they're going to figure out they can just hang a phone on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's so hilarious.
They're going to relearn house phones.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I know. Well, it's been. I don't want to keep it too long, but I want to ask you another thing or two. In your one chapter, which I liked, it reminded me of I liked it because it was kind of preppery. Not like a prepper, but it was about gear. Your folklore gear that is important to have, your essentials. One thing that you mentioned was knives, and for me, I can't help it. I'm a blatant knife collector. And what is the lore? Tell us the magic of knives that people maybe are not aware of that can make their little pocket knife a little bit more sacred. And if they're not carrying a pocket knife, you will after Jake tells you how magical knives are.
Well, if you're a boy growing up in Appalachia, most likely you've been gifted a pocket knife at least 13, more than 10 times for every birthday, holiday, Christmas, Thanksgiving by multiple other male relatives. Like, I literally used to just have a box of old pocket knives that I just acquired over, my childhood. And here they're used for, basically everything that a knife is used for. As well as, unscrewing things and different things like that. Or some people even, use them as a toothpick, which I don't recommend if you ain't never done it, because you might cut yourself. But knives in Appalachian folklore, their use has always, their magical and medical use has always been based on their practical use, which is of cutting or severing. So there's, I believe I give the one weather charm of splitting a storm in half with an old kitchen knife. You basically take the knife out and, have the what part is it? It's like the cutting part of the blade pointed toward the storm, and you drive the hilt or the handle of the knife down into the earth, and that's supposed to split the storm in two. And that I have actually seen work, because I believe it was back in 2011. It was the last time that a tornado came through here, and it was actually coming down West Market Street. And I lived me and my family lived right off of West Market Street, and it got so close to where we could hear the tornado ripping trees up. Like, we could hear the roots being pulled up out of the ground, transformers, exploding and all sorts of stuff. And then we, took the knife out and, put it in the ground that way. And I swear within about 10 minutes, it was all gone and it never hit us. And then that night we was watching the news, and apparently right before it hit our area, I can't remember if they said it split in two or it essentially just dissipated. So I have seen that one work, from firsthand experience. But knives were also used to, cut things up, whether it was, I actually put a knife under my partner's side of the bed, because they used to have night terrors almost every single night. So I took one of the kitchen knives and I put it under the bed there, and they haven't had a nightmare since. So the knife in that, regard cuts up the nightmares or the bad dreams, kind of like a dream catcher catches them. The knife simply cuts them in half, and renders them powerless. And the same was done when a woman was giving birth. If the pain was too much, the knife essentially became the Appalachian epidural, and it would cut the pain in half. Arrowheads were also used for that. There would be a couple of arrowheads, usually 3. Odd numbers are used a lot in Appalachian folk magic. They would be put into a pot of boiling water, and they would be allowed to boil again for an odd number of minutes. and then the woman was, given the water to drink, and that was supposed to cut her pain in half. The boiling water having taken on the cutting and severing aspects of the arrowhead itself to also cut and sever the pain. And that one I have seen work firsthand as well, not necessarily in a birthing process, but specifically with my mother, who has she has fibromyalgia, and I think about 3 discs slipped in her back, a pinched nerve, and she, at the time that we used to use it a lot, she had about 2 blood clots, one in her arm and one in her leg. So, and we'd never really had health insurance, so she didn't have any, like pain medication or anything like that. So, that trick became the pain medicine.
That is definitely magical. I dig it. I mean, and all this lore, I mean, I'm always astounded, all of it has a history. It came from somewhere, and that just makes me wonder, putting 3 arrowheads, or was it knives? It could be either way. And like boiling it for an odd number of minutes, that would cut the pain in half. And you think to yourself, there's something that rings true. It's like, it's true. How it works, that's just magical. I don't know. Where did it come from? I don't know, but it must have been really great in the creation of your book, just the research to figure it out. And I'm sure it's taken years. It's taken most of your life so far. I'm sure it's been really a creation of this book. But and we will wrap things up here. I don't want to keep you all night, but
you're good.
But what lore have you found? So let's say remedies, let's call them, or maybe, objects, gear like a knife. Have you found that in researching really you found interesting, be it just its properties or its history? Like, what are some of the things that that you've researched that really just blow you away?
Not much really, simply because I grew up around it all.
Okay.
So, it was already familiar. There are some, stories like old ghost stories or folk healing stories that really do blow my mind. Like in the one book by Andrew Cavender, I think his name is. Hold on. It's the folk medicine in southern Appalachia. He talks about a folk healer who used to live here in Irwin, Tennessee, I believe, or maybe it was Unicoi. I don't know. They're really close together. And she was a folk healer, and the way that she healed was very peculiar. I can't say that word. It was very interesting, which I've only heard of a couple of times. But she would essentially become like a mirror, specifically for people who Anthony Cavender, that's his name, not Andrew. For people who believe that they were, possessed by she would have the person look into her eyes and essentially gaze into her face. And I talk about gazing in the book too. And then the person would sometimes see her face darken into nothing but blackness. Sometimes they would see her face melt. And all these other, weird things that, verge on the line of being a, hallucination. And then it would finish with either, a voice or something like that saying exactly what the problem was or where it was coming from. Or the patient would see either the witch that cursed them or the demons themselves that were, in the patient tormenting them. And then after that, they were essentially, freed of, that demon or that curse or whatever it was.
And that book was Folk Medicine of Southern Appalachia. Was that Anthony Cavender?
Yeah, let me go get it again. It's been a couple years since I read it, so it's way back here in the bookshelf. Yeah, Folk Medicine in Southern Appalachia. Anthony Cavender.
Gotcha. Wow. That's amazing. Great story. And, there's definitely reality behind it. So as we close things up, I'd ask, you do sessions with people. You do, what are your offerings? And I guess as we wrap things up, I would say, of course, there's show notes to everything we've talked about, books that we've mentioned. There's show notes to of course, we list your website, Little Chicago Conjure 13. Anyway, it's all there. People can go to the website, or, radiantcreators.com, and all your links are on there. And of course, you do services for people. And can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I do general root work and conjure for people, whether it's for luck, money, court cases, things of that nature. I don't really deal in love works or, love or relationship type of situations, simply because in my experience, they become too dramatic and I don't like them.
I like it.
But yeah, I do a lot of things like that, and especially of. Now, I'm not a medical doctor. I ain't got no medical degrees, but if you're looking for like a herbal remedy or something like that, then I can suggest one to you. But usually my services are offered in a spiritual sense, so that's whether it's spiritual cleansing. Or other spiritual services like doing readings. I do playing card readings based on like kind of like the method that I give in Backwoods Witchcraft, the one that my mother taught me. But I also do bone readings, which is basically telling fortunes with possum and raccoon bones, among a few other things.
Oh, I dig it. Well,
and I also do folk healing for free as well, because I was always taught never to charge for folk healing. I can do folk healing for stopping the blood up in a wound, colic, toothache, headache, backache, general pains, and a few. I think I have it listed on there of the general ones that I do for folk healing or whatnot.
Gotcha. Yeah, and
usually all that's required is the person's their full name and their location, and of course where the pain is or what the pain is.
Yeah, it makes plenty of sense to me. Oh yeah, well, it's been great talking to you. I mean, I would just recommend to everybody who's listening, get Backwoods Witchcraft and read it, because it will enhance your experience of life. It will help you live a more honest life, a more honest work. I wish there was some way I could express that or translate it. I mean, I read that section from the book, so people have heard it, but I think it's a great one to highlight, a great one to ponder. Are you doing honest work? So get Backwoods Witchcraft, make Jake lots of money, and
I doubt that.
Live an honest, have honest work. And as we end this amazing interview, I guess people can check the show notes to see where they can get a hold of you. But, give us your contact. How can people get a hold of you who are listening to this, who might like to, work with you?
Usually people contact me simply via email at littlechicagoconjure@yahoo.com. I did have a phone number that was linked through Google Voice, but I'm still trying to work out some kinks with that, because apparently it's also somebody else's phone number and they've been getting the text messages and stuff to that number. So I'm trying to still figure that one out. But yeah, generally through email or message me through the
Little Chicago Conjure page on Facebook, or you can also find me on Instagram or Twitter if you prefer those methods.
Gotcha. And we'll link all that in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. Definitely, Facebook Messenger or Twitter, or your emails right there on your website. And so, well, it's been great talking to you. I think you created an amazing body of work there. I hope more books are coming in the future. And, I'm glad to get some exposure to this, because really, people, live an honest life, damn it. and carry a pocket knife and get Jake's book now. Do it now.
Well, thank you.
All right. Take care. It's been great talking to you.
You as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Radiant Creators. Check out more content at radiantcreators.com. If you like the show, give it a like. Share this. Comment. Keep the conversation going. You can also find us at alternatecurrentradio.com, where there's this show and a lot more.